I'm very happy to host in this conference and to introduce to you the Honorable Omer Bar-Lev, Labour Party Minister of Internal Security, Commander in the Army. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to put some subjects on the table, things that are part of what bothers the Israeli public today, and to ask for your opinion on many very major issues today in Israel, and to get your perspective as a minister in the government, as your experience in the army, and also just as a citizen in the state of Israel. So hello and thank you. Let's begin. Hello, it's always great to be here, not just as a research fellow. So I'd like to start with something that really occupies all of us in the state of Israel, and that's the terrible violence that is enhanced in the public Israeli society, and especially maybe in the Arab sector, but definitely not only. And the gap that's created between the expectations of the public to get quick answers and quick solutions and the grappling of the police and the authorities to cope with the very complex processes that they have to do during the violence period. Every day we hear about terrible violence cases, and immediately there's criticism on the part of the public, on the police and the government, on its functioning, and demand for quick solutions. First of all, prevention, but also in deciphering and analyzing and detecting. And we know that a lot is done, whether it be designated units or the attempt to improve the communication between the authorities and the police and the community, having more positions, etc., etc. So first of all, I'd like to hear from you. Can you detail for us in a few minutes what actually is done in this area in order to get a full picture, and then we'll go over to the second part about this gap that exists between the expectations of the public and the feeling or the sense of what is happening in the field. So let me start the opposite, because the second part is easier. You know, we Israelis, we always think what is more urgent or more important. You know, it's either everything has to be done on the spot. We don't have patience. That's part of our character. It's part of my character as well, I admit. And therefore, I'm not surprised about the gap between the patience of the public and its wish to have every minute, every moment to feel secure, and the situation that unfortunately it's not so. So maybe it's a sociological question, the Israeli character, etc. But that's what motivates us too. You spoke about violence in general in the state of Israel, and also the among the Arab community. So this violence, when you look at all sorts of measures, many years back, it always on the rise. And therefore, the question that I put on the table, and that's how I measure us, is what do we do in order to strengthen deterrence and reduce violence? Obviously, in order to strengthen deterrence, you have to do things that will do it. Then we have to do things that will be seen and also be felt by the various criminals. And therefore, it's a long process. One of the indices or the measurements that I test weekly is not how many in the police, you know, in the police, they said not how many cases were opened. First, I thought it's like opening a case. No, I'm talking about complaints of the public. It's not how many complaints were filed. The question is, within those complaints, how many were indicted, how many were charged. Because if you submit more complaints, it doesn't necessarily say that the situation is better, maybe the opposite. And if we want to see whether the deterrence is growing, is to see how many indictments were submitted. Or what is the percentage of detainment, detaining people until, if you compare it to last year. All these things, we see an increase. I'm talking about scores of percentage, 40% in seizing arms and weapons, 25% increase in indictments. All these things are long processes. By the way, from the moment you indict until the moment that the accused actually is charged with imprisonment that is deterring, because indictment is just the first part, but then you've got the trial itself that unfortunately takes ages, too much. And then you have the punishment. Is the punishment deterring? And unfortunately, there are many, many examples that the punishment doesn't deter anybody. It insults us as citizens, that's the punishment. So there's this gap. We're talking about processes that take time, and the results are going to be seen maybe in a few years from now. How, nevertheless, can we negotiate what the ministry is doing or the police is doing, maybe to invest more money in information and to better convey what is happening in order to give the feeling, the sense of self-security, I think that the sense of the security should come from the citizens. I can say many things about the media, and we have to invest in influence, but at the end of the day, we just have to do more things. We just have to do more things and then to measure the results and to see if there are results. For example, this is no secret. This is a negative example. I'm not revealing any secret about the fact that there is criticism against governance in the south. The Bedouins, they go wild, etc. When I came in office, I had to determine my policy, and one of the questions was increasing the governance in the south. And then I asked, okay, what index can I give? How can I quantify to see whether we are successful? Everybody knows how to talk. Yes, many politicians, they all talk very nicely. We're very good at that. But at the end of this, we need hard evidence. So one of the indices was increase. One of the indices for lack of governance is the Bedouins going wild on the roads and the shooting, and we see it on the news every day. We see these videos. One of the measures was an increase of 15% in tickets against Bedouins, traffic tickets, and all sorts of cars without licenses. So 6 months have gone by. Every quarter, I compare planning against implementation. And 6 months have passed, and I said, okay, let's see. And I found out that the enforcement with tickets doubled itself. It's not 15% as was my target, but 100% more. But on the other hand, the number of the fatal accidents and the number of casualties went up 40%. So we have a problem here. So I said, you know what? Give me all the tickets from January 2021 until today. I want to see what happened with these tickets. I said it was doubled. I said, just show me the tickets for very severe cases, the ones we hear about in the media. A Bedouin driver without a license drives and causes a fatal accident. I only took these cases. There were 360 cases from January 21 until the end of June. Out of those 360 cases, only 21 of them came to the courts. Sorry, 21%, he says. And what was the verdict? 68% out of these 21%, they got a fine of 1,000 shekel. And, of course, they took away their license to person who doesn't have a license. So what can you take away? How can you do it? So this is an example, and always, the police is always to blame, and sometimes justifiably so, sometimes not. And this is an example to the fact that the enforcement was enhanced, but that the result at the end of the day is exactly the opposite. The more you give more tickets to such cases, and the person without license is driving, and then he gets a 800 shekel fine and 6 months, they take away their. I said, why shouldn't he continue to do what he did before? Therefore, the problem is multidisciplinary. Namely, it has to do with the courts and the legislation. We tried to do some legislation. We succeeded in some things. We managed to give minimum punishment for holding illegal weapons. But people in the courts, they don't like it. What didn't we succeed in? With the evidence order. Today, when there's a crime anywhere in Israel, the police has to gather evidence. If there was a crime like that, let's say in a shop, in an Arab city, what happens is, in a shop, where there's a TV circuits, television, and you have the information, until the police gets from a judge the license to go and to seize the camera and to check the blood. There's nothing left there. You don't see bullets, you don't see anything, you don't see blood, everything is cleaned up, the camera is gone. So the problem is very complicated. There are a lot of segments. What is under my responsibility, I tried to check a whole series of things, and of course some of the things is the number of casualties, people who were murdered in the Arab sector. It rose dramatically. Then we managed to reduce it somewhat, and then it jumped again. In last July, 18, and in August it went down to 5. If you ask me, do I have an explanation why? No, I don't have an explanation. But I can say that apparently when I entered office, if I thought that within a year we will see dramatic changes and decision makers, both Israeli and Arabs, said to me it's going to take at least 2 or 3 years. Maybe the truth is somewhat closer to what they said as far as timetable until we actually see dramatic changes. But of course it depends on many other things as well.
So let's really connect to that. Considering the complexity that you spoke about when it comes to coping with violence in Israeli society, on the Arab street as well as in a Jewish society, some have called upon having the ISA and other intelligence organizations in Israel, with all their technologies, to bring them into the picture, to have them feature with all that is implied by that, and a lot is implied by that. So I wanted to ask you, do you think we're headed in that direction? What would be the potential advantages of such a move, and what would be the risks and disadvantages associated with such a step, and what is your position? One of my first meetings with the former head of the ISA, Nadav Argaman, in 2 sentences he said to me, he told me his opinion. What is the difference between the police force and the ISA? He said the police force, as we all know, has to collect evidence, and the ISA, the problem with the Israel police force is not knowledge. Anyone who says the police knows everything and doesn't do anything is right in the first part of the sentence. But based on intelligence alone, you cannot submit an indictment. And what Nadav Argaman said, the only difference is that when I issue an administrative order, because I know this person has, according to intelligence, done something, I bring them into a room without an attorney, and now it'll take a day or a week or 2 weeks. But at the end of the day, in 90% of cases, this person will say he did it, and that'll be and he'll give a statement, and that'll be the end of that. Now, do we want in Israel for the police forced to act this way, I want to remind you that if these will be the rules, then they'll apply to each and every one of us, not only to a certain population or to a certain community or town or city. And the example I gave before about legislation and the burden of the overload on courts, only 21% of those who drove without a license and were caught were even brought to court. That means that we have so much more to do and so much can be done and should be done before we even get to such extreme steps, such as involving the ISA. But I can say, thankfully and happily, that our collaboration, both in intelligence and otherwise, with the ISA and the police force is very intense. It is regular, maybe not daily, but definitely weekly. And obviously, the ISA has its own law, and they do not deviate from the ISA law. But here, too, it's a very, very precarious and fragile story, because the ISA can only take action against those people who challenge Israel's regime. And once you throw a grenade at an Arab mayor, it is challenging Israel's authority as a country, because that mayor, God forbid, may have another event going on. So now we sit together and we analyze these situations and we decide. Usually the ISA decides whether this issue is under its jurisdiction and it is challenging Israel's authority and Israel's regime, or whether it is a crime, a conventional crime, so to speak, and that's why it's a police matter. Okay, so we don't have very long. So I just want very quickly to focus on Arab society, because we know that there are unique attributes and unique elements that are special to Arab society. And some say that some of that is cultural, that their culture allows them to have domestic violence, allows them or normalizes violence against women and against the backdrop of dignity and family honor. And other people will say that this violence is a result of neglect and even discrimination by all Israeli authorities vis-à-vis the Israeli Arab society, which created frustration and an inability to mobilize economically, to integrate into society, particularly among the younger generation. And some others still say that it's actually a problem of identity conflict among Israeli Arabs that is also causing frustration, because on the one hand, they want to be part of Israeli society, but it is very difficult for them to do so. And on the other hand, they also identify with the fate of the Palestinians in the territories, and with their dire situation, their difficult personal and financial situation, and at the same time, we are also distancing from one another. We are far from a political peace or solution. So that creates a kind of pressure bubble. So I want to ask you what your opinion is on the dynamics between these parties, and considering the limited resources, if there is one area that you think should be addressed or should be focused on, and what it is. Well, given the limited resources and the limited time we have, you managed to ask two questions in one, so I'll answer both. Look, again, very briefly, what's happening in Israeli Arab society, or the reason it's happening, is three reasons. First of all, crime is prevalent everywhere. Even if we had here a utopian country, there would still be crime going on. I don't know whether that's true or not, because they say that Herzl's dream was that there would be a Jewish state and a Jewish thief. That was his dream. So unfortunately, that dream came true a little too well. But crime will always be around. There will always be crime. Crime develops and grows in places where, inter alia, there is anger and frustration. There are dozens of studies on this topic, nothing to do with Israel. But in anywhere where there's poverty around the world, frustration causes criminality and criminal behavior. But in Israel, of course, when there are such huge gaps, and the gaps only grow as time goes by, not because Israeli Arab society is not progressing, but because Jewish society is progressing so much faster. And so the gap continues to grow. And the gaps, as I've said, leads to frustration. Frustration leads to anger, and anger leads to crime. So that's the second point. And the third point, and it's not very politically correct to say, but I'll say it anyway because you mentioned it already, is a cultural issue. The number of Arab women who are killed each year is double the number of Jewish women that are murdered. And I'm sorry that I'm using this measure, even though we all know that Israeli Arabs only constitute less than 20% of Israeli society. So again, I'm no sociologist and this is not my mission, but when you have a fight between tribes and you know how it's counted in the police force, is it a draw or an odd number? If it's if it's a draw, if two were killed from each family, so there's a better chance of reaching a sulha, of having them kind of forgive each other. But if it is an odd number, it's just a matter of time until it'll be a draw once again, an even number of casualties on both sides. And I'm sure most of you know, even better than I do, that when it comes to tribes, when it comes to chamulot, to families in Arab society, so even if it's someone's seventh cousin twice removed, it is very difficult for the police force or anyone else to protect and prevent. So that's as far as your first question. As for your second question, I will try to focus. You asked about, okay, the nationalist topic, how does that topic, Israeli, Palestinian, Judean, Samarian, so on, how does that impact? Well, we saw it in the hardest form, in the most severest form, and we were all shocked by it. I wasn't part of the government then, but it was the civilians, it was the Israel police force. It was in Operation Guardian of the Walls. In Guardian of the Walls, we saw the overlap between conventional crime, so to speak, and these nationalist phenomena was huge, was very broad. We saw it in the mixed cities, we saw it in many places. And the question I was asked was, from the moment that I entered office, when will Guardian of the Walls 2 happen? When will the second Guardian of the Walls take place? And it was my job, inter alia, to stop that from happening, to stop the second operation. And I will tell you that the Guardian of the Walls 2 actually did take place, but it was very different from Operation Guardian of the Walls 1. It began in the month of Ramadan. The month of Ramadan went quite quietly. I'm not comparing it to a year ago, when following that Guardian of the Walls began. Because in recent years also, and it didn't happen by chance, it happened because, among other things, it was it was our theory of operation. When I saw police officers using IDF terminology that I used, I realized that I did something. Something of my spirit was absorbed, because there was a lot of force in a backslope. And once something happens, then not for the first time the Palestinian flag is waved somewhere, we immediately, jump on them. But as soon as it starts to escalate, we go in and we solve the problem. And that's why in the Gate of Nablus in Jerusalem, in Ramadan, there was a celebration of shopkeepers, Arab shopkeepers in eastern Jerusalem. Their interest was that they would be quiet, and they were celebrating, and we did it. It was the municipality of Jerusalem, and it was the district of Jerusalem of the police force. We made sure that there would be people there maintaining quiet. And the peak was in the Laylat al-Qadr, which is the most important night of the Muslims during Ramadan, when Temple Mount, the shopkeepers and merchants, Jerusalem Arab Palestinian merchants and shopkeepers, were protecting and making sure that it would be quiet, all relative of course, and they were giving out coffee and cookies to Palestinian worshippers. And we also had the parade, the flags parade. And again, the flags parade, 33 years it has been happening, taking the same route. And just a year ago, Netanyahu was scared. A few rockets were fired at Jerusalem. He stopped the parade, and then 24 hours after I entered office, the parade took a different route. And everyone was against me, and people from my side of the political map were against me. But not only, I'm not going to say who, but there were many people in the state of Israel who during internal discussion said, we're going to go to war and Hamas and so on and so forth. And I said, no, it's not going to happen. And the police force will make sure that it'll all happen quietly, and so it did. And the peak was on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av were 2 days after Operation Breaking Dawn. Jihad were going crazy on social media. They wanted the Arab Israeli citizens and the East Jerusalem Arabs to go to Temple Mount and make a mess, not just a mess, terrible stuff. And they were saying that the Israeli Jews were going to take over, and they sent 2 rockets. They launched 2 rockets at Jerusalem, and nothing happened. I didn't stop it. The number of Israeli visitors on Temple Mount that day was the largest number ever, and it went quietly. It passed quietly. That's why I began by saying, and if you don't remember what I said at the beginning, I will remind you that I said that yes, there was an operation, there was a Guardian of the Walls 2, but what happened a year ago didn't happen again, and it wasn't by chance that it happened. So I can't exactly detail everything we did, all the steps we took here and there, this and that, but those things didn't happen by chance. It was no accident. And again, the peak was that Israeli Arabs and the East Jerusalem Arabs decided not to take part, not to participate, even though it was very emotional. Even though it was about Temple Mount, it was 9th of Av, they decided not to take part in this activity, in this kind of step. And so that's why I'm a little more optimistic. And I hope that this kind of comes full circle. Yes, it does. And it certainly is very encouraging to hear, because there's a sense, there's a feeling that there is a connection between the calendar and the rate of violence. But now you're saying that this cycle can indeed be broken. So I cannot but thank you, and wish you and everyone here a happy holidays, happy high Jewish holidays. May they be quiet, may they be calm. Thank you.